What if I told you that the fear of conflict is slowly destroying the life you want? Every time you avoid confrontation, you're telling yourself that your needs, your feelings, and your voice don't matter. It might feel easier to stay silent to keep the peace, but deep down, you know it's eating away at your relationships, your self-respect, and your happiness. Imagine a life where you no longer fear those uncomfortable conversations, where you can stand your ground and speak your truth without guilt. What would it feel like to finally break free from that fear and start living authentically? Ready to take control and stop avoiding conflict? Let's dive in. Let's begin by diving into why we fear conflict so much. For many of us, conflict feels like a direct threat, not just to the situation, but to our sense of self. Growing up, we are often conditioned to avoid confrontation at all costs. Parents, teachers, and society at large teach us that peace equals silence, and that speaking up could disrupt that peace. It's ingrained in us to believe that disagreement equals rejection. The earlier we learn this lesson, the stronger the fear becomes. But here's the truth: conflict is not inherently dangerous. Conflict simply means differing perspectives, and when handled well, it can lead to stronger relationships, clearer understanding, and personal growth. The problem arises when we've been taught to fear conflict rather than embrace it. Why does it feel so threatening? A huge part of it is the fear of rejection. We often associate conflict with the idea that if we argue or disagree with someone, they might push us away, reject us, or think less of us. This fear, deeply rooted in our biology, comes from our need to belong and fit in. Our primal instinct is to seek approval and avoid being ostracized from the group. So, we avoid conflict to protect ourselves from this perceived threat. But here's the kicker: conflict is actually a crucial part of human interaction. It's how we communicate our needs, boundaries, and desires. It's how we resolve differences and create deeper connections with others. The fear of conflict becomes a barrier, preventing us from experiencing the full potential of relationships. Moreover, conflict brings up vulnerability. When we confront someone, especially in a disagreement, we expose parts of ourselves that are often hidden. Our emotions, frustrations, and sometimes our insecurities are laid bare. For many people, this is terrifying, but vulnerability is the key to connection. Without vulnerability, our relationships stay shallow and distant. When we're afraid of conflict, we often make certain mistakes that compound the problem. The first is suppressing our emotions. We hide our true feelings, thinking that if we just stay quiet and keep things under the surface, everything will eventually be okay. But that's rarely the case. Suppressed emotions don't just disappear, they build up, and sooner or later they explode in unhealthy ways. This can manifest as passive-aggressive behavior, sudden outbursts, or feelings of deep frustration that seem to come out of nowhere. Take, for example, a relationship where one person constantly avoids discussing important issues. Over time, this suppression builds up resentment. The person who is avoiding conflict may tell themselves they are being the bigger person by staying silent, but eventually it leads to emotional disconnect, frustration, and perhaps even the breakdown of the relationship. Another mistake we make is people-pleasing. We bend over backwards to keep others happy, saying yes when we want to say no, agreeing to things we don't want, just to avoid any form of disagreement. But when we prioritize others' feelings over our own, we slowly lose touch with our own identity. Over time, we become resentful, feeling trapped in our own choices. It's like we're living someone else's life, constantly trying to meet everyone else's needs at the expense of our own. Imagine being invited to an event you really don't want to attend. Instead of saying no, you agree because you don't want to disappoint the person who invited you. You drag yourself there, feeling uncomfortable and unhappy the whole time. This behavior chips away at your confidence and reinforces the fear of saying no, creating a cycle of self-sacrifice. Lastly, there's the mistake of misinterpreting conflict as a threat to relationships. Many of us believe that any form of disagreement could lead to rejection, abandonment, or the end of the relationship altogether. We think that arguing will ruin everything, but conflict, when handled respectfully, can actually strengthen relationships. It allows for growth and deeper understanding. The truth is, it's not conflict itself that destroys relationships, it's how we handle it. By avoiding it, we prevent ourselves from experiencing the true depth of connection that conflict can bring. Now that we understand why we fear conflict and the mistakes we make when we avoid it, how do we begin to overcome this fear? The first step is shifting how we view conflict. Instead of seeing it as something to be feared, we need to start seeing it as an opportunity to grow, to communicate more clearly, and to deepen our relationships. Start by recognizing that conflict is a normal and necessary part of life. It's not something to avoid, but something to embrace. When handled with respect and understanding, conflict can bring clarity. It can resolve tension, clear misunderstandings, and strengthen connections. Reframing conflict as a positive experience rather than a negative one is the first step toward embracing it. One of the best ways to handle conflict is by practicing active listening. When we engage in conflict, we often get caught up in our own emotions and responses, making it difficult to understand the other person's point of view. Active listening is a powerful tool that helps us to truly hear and understand the other person's perspective. It requires putting our own thoughts and feelings aside for a moment and focusing entirely on the other person. This doesn't mean we have to agree with them, but it shows respect and opens the door to more meaningful conversations. For example, in a heated argument with a friend, instead of jumping to defend yourself, pause and listen to their concerns. Reflect back what they've said. I hear you're feeling upset because I didn't follow through on our plans. Is that right? This simple act of validation can diffuse tension and create space for a productive conversation. Another important technique for handling conflict is being assertive. Assertiveness is the ability to express your feelings, needs, and opinions openly, honestly, and respectfully. It's about standing up for yourself without being aggressive or passive. For instance, instead of saying, "I'm sorry, but I feel upset," you can say, "I feel upset because of what happened, and I'd like to talk about it." By stating your feelings clearly and confidently, you assert your right to be heard while maintaining respect for the other person. Start small when practicing conflict resolution. You don't need to dive into major confrontations right away. Begin with low-stakes situations, maybe a minor disagreement with a coworker or a slight misunderstanding with a friend. These smaller situations provide great practice for handling larger conflicts down the line. As you build confidence in these smaller moments, your ability to handle bigger challenges will improve. It's important to understand that conflict, when managed well, brings incredible benefits. First, it can strengthen your relationships. When we communicate openly and honestly, we create an atmosphere of trust and mutual understanding. Instead of letting problems fester in silence, we confront them head-on, which leads to stronger bonds and more authentic connections. Conflict also fosters personal growth. Every time we face a difficult conversation, we learn something new about ourselves, our boundaries, our values, and our needs. This self-awareness helps us navigate life with more confidence, clarity, and emotional intelligence. We stop living in fear of what others might think and start standing in our own truth. Additionally, embracing conflict helps us build emotional resilience. Each time we handle a difficult situation, we grow stronger. We learn how to manage our emotions and remain calm under pressure. Conflict becomes less of an obstacle and more of a challenge that helps us become better versions of ourselves. So, are you ready to stop letting the fear of conflict control your life? The truth is, conflict doesn't have to be a destructive force. It can be the key to deeper relationships, personal growth, and living authentically. When you face conflict with confidence, you open the door to more fulfilling experiences, more meaningful connections, and a life where you can speak your truth without fear. Start small, practice, and remember, conflict isn't the enemy. It's an opportunity for growth. It's a chance to stand up for yourself and your beliefs. Embrace it, and you'll find that life and your relationships become much more rewarding.